Good morning, guys. Today we're going to pick up where we left off last class period, and we're going to start discussing a few more of the basic economic concepts. Okay, to review last class period, we looked at scarcity and how scarcity affects everything that we do in our economy. It affects what we produce, how we produce it. It also is affected by the natural resources that we have. Remember our factors of production: land, labor, capital, entrepreneur. Today we are looking at the differences between a good and service. We're looking at the paradox of value and how it is affected by scarcity, and we're looking at the circular flow model, which will address the flow of goods and services and money in our economy. Okay, to start off, let's look at what an economic product is. It says an economic product is a good and service that is useful, relatively scarce, and transferable from one person to another. Okay, so let's break down this term. Most economic terms, if you can break down each part, you can understand the definition fully. Okay, so we have goods and services we're going to look at in a second. It has to be useful, means it has to serve a purpose. We know that everything is scarce because of the limited resources that we have and unlimited wants. And it has to be transferable from one person to another. Okay, so you've got to be able to either see the product, touch the product, transfer it from one person to another, so you can hand it to another person, like you see here with the little boy with the Goofy's Candy Company big sucker, or the product of the action. For example, if you go get your hair cut. Okay, you can see the product of that particular, it is the action there is transferable from one person to another. Okay, so that is an economic product, but in order to fully understand it, we have to know the difference between a good and a service. Goods are items that are economically useful and satisfy a want. So somebody's got to want it. It's got to serve a purpose to somebody. It's got to be useful. Now, here's one thing that you need to remember. Just because it's not useful to you doesn't mean it is not useful to somebody else. Okay, somebody wanted the product, otherwise, or there had to be some sort of demand for it, otherwise they wouldn't make the product. Okay, for example, see the books here. The topic may not interest you, it may not be something you want to read, but somebody probably has that particular interest in mind. It's got to interest somebody. It has to satisfy a want. Remember the difference between wants and needs. A want is how we express a need. Remember, we only had 5 needs: food, water, clothing, shelter, and air. Okay, so it's got to be economically useful, means it's got to serve a purpose, and it's got to satisfy somebody's want. Maybe not yours, but somebody. Let's look at a service. Oh, excuse me. First, we got to break down consumer goods and capital goods. Okay, my fault. Consumer goods. Consumer goods are we take home and use them, right? We are the consumers. Consumers are people who go to the store and buy a product. So if I go to the store, I purchase something, I take it home, and I use it, that is a consumer good. It says it is intended for final use by the individual. What does final use mean? Why is that important? It means you're going to take it home and you're going to use it up. You'll use it till it probably dies, or you don't want it anymore, and you sell it to somebody else. Okay, but it has to be for the individual or a business. Okay, depending on the circumstance there. Okay, so let's look at capital goods. A capital good is a manufactured good that is used to make something else. Okay, that's why I said that yes, some capital goods can be consumer goods, pencils, toilet paper, they're not being used to make something else. Okay, so they would be a consumer good. Capital goods are going to be your tools, machines that you need, that you use to actually make a product. Okay, if you're going to Hyundai, then your machines that you use to make your cars would be your capital good. Now, here's a question. If I'm an at-home baker, Can my oven, and I'm selling it to somebody else, can my at-home oven be both a consumer good and a capital good? Yes. Okay, it can. It depends on the circumstance and what you're using it for. If I'm using it to cook dinner for my family, that is a consumer good. If I'm using it to make products that I'm going to sell at, say, a farmer's market, that's when it becomes a capital good. Okay, so depending on the circumstances, they can be both. It depends on what it's used for and who it's being used by. Okay, so let's look at services. Okay, a service is work somebody performs for you. A beautician. You go to the nail salon. If you go to get your oil changed. If you are sitting in a class, in your economics class, that is a service. I'm providing a service. I'm providing an education. What you need to remember is that you cannot touch a service. You can touch a good. It's tangible. You can touch it. Services you cannot touch. They are going to be strictly work somebody performs for you. You can see the product of the service. You can say, oh, look, my nails are pretty now that I went and got a manicure, or look at my hair after I got out of the salon. But you cannot touch the actual service because it is work somebody is doing. That laborer, remember our factors of production, the labor is providing that particular service for you. You can see the service, but you cannot touch the service. Okay, so now we've got to determine how we go about using these scarce resources. How do we determine, okay, we know that things have value, right? I told you last class period that there's no such thing as free lunch because of time, because of resources, because of talents. Everything has a cost associated to it. What we're determining now is how do we determine that cost? Okay, so value of a good is nothing more than its monetary worth. Okay, so if I go to the store and I go to AT&T and I buy a cell phone and it is $1,000, that dollar value is what we assume that product is worth. Now, here's something that is important to understand. That price tag, guys, is not what an item is actually worth. Okay? You've got to build in a margin there. That way you can make a profit. So I want you to think of value as how much it costs to make the product, not what they're selling it for. Okay, that'll make it easier for you to understand value in the sense of economic terms. Now, let me ask you, do we value water? Most people would say no, depending on the circumstance, right? If you're very thirsty, maybe you live in a desert, you go on hiking, you're thirsty, then you would value water. Right, but on a whole, because water is so plentiful for us, we go to the refrigerator, put in a glass, it gives us water. We go to the faucet, fill up our pan to cook in, it gives us water. Typically, we do not value water. Now, would places like Africa value water? Yes. They value water a whole lot more than we do. Well, why is that? Why is it that places where water is scarce, they value it more than we do? That's the paradox of value. When some necessities, such as water, have little value to us, but non-necessities like diamonds, Jordans, jewelry, fancy car, they mean more to us and have more value to us than the things that we actually need. And that is the paradox of value. So for places like Africa, in my example, they value water because scarcity, guys, scarcity of water determines value. That's why gold has a higher value. Diamonds have a higher value. Now we know there is no shortage of diamonds. But if everybody had all the diamonds that they wanted, we would eventually run out. Okay, so scarcity affects the value of a good. The more scarce the item, typically the higher the value that it has. So let's look at utility. Utility is the usefulness a product has to us. The capacity to be useful or provide satisfaction. Have you ever bought anything, maybe it's an article of clothing, and you thought you were really going to like it, but then you got it home and it really wasn't really what you wanted? I've done that before. Or you bought an item at say you find a new drink at the convenience store or the grocery store. It's like, oh, I want to try that. You get it home, it's nasty. Okay, that is utility. Utility is the satisfaction or usefulness we get from a product. If it does not provide us any utility, if it's not useful or does not provide satisfaction, then typically we will not buy that product again. But how does utility and scarcity come together to make value? Let's look at it. An item has to be useful. Okay, that means, guys, somebody's got to want it, right? Somebody has to want and the product has to be useful in order for people to want it. Okay? It also has to be scarce. The more scarce the item, typically the higher the value. So in order for something to have value, it's got to be scarce, and it has to provide some sort of usefulness or satisfaction to us in order for it to have value. Well, where does all this value come from? Why is it important? Because value of items and the accumulation of items that we have help determine the wealth of a person. Look at Uncle Scrooge here. Uncle Scrooge, you would probably say, is filthy rich. Okay, absolutely filthy rich. Bill Gates. Even our President Trump. Whether you like him or not, he is a rich man. Okay, so let's look at the definition of wealth. This is the accumulation of products that are tangible. Remember, tangible, means you have to be able to touch it. Services are also built in to a nation's wealth, and we'll get to that in just a second. Accumulation of products that are tangible, you got to be able to touch it. That are scarce, means there's not a lot of it, like the gold you see here in Mr. Scrooge's vault. Useful means it's got to serve a purpose, it's got to provide satisfaction to somebody, and transferable from one person to another. You could transfer. I know Donald and Huey, Dewey, Louie, all of them are hoping that one day Uncle Scrooge would transfer his money, his gold, his coins, his dollar bills, all of his wealth to them. Call it an inheritance, right? But what we're going to see is that, hang on before we get to circular flow, I'm sorry. Adam Smith, guys, said that it's not the wealth of a nation, it's not the things that a person or country has that makes up the wealth of the country. The people make up the wealth of the country. Well, why is it he would say that? Because without our human talents, without our time, our effort, nothing that is produced would be produced. Okay, so when you look at the wealth of a nation, we would assume, we call it GDP, or the gross domestic product, which we'll look at another time, but you may have heard that term in the news. That gross domestic product looks at the wealth of a nation. How well is our nation doing in that particular year? Okay, so if we're looking at the wealth of a nation, Adam Smith says no, it's not that GDP that determines the wealth of the nation. It is the people and their efforts that make those products actually possible. Without us, without our time, talents, and efforts, nothing that is made would be made. We're going to look at the circular flow model. Okay, the circular flow model is looking at money, the flow of money in our economy, and the flow of services. And where do we all play in this, okay? Where do we, the people, the businesses, what part do we play in the flow of goods and services and money in our economy? So let's take a look at this video.
Welcome to ECD. It works. Just household businesses, but there's a much bigger thing.
Okay, so in the video, he illustrated what we see here. Now it's flipped here versus the video, but it doesn't matter because it's the same. Okay, let's start with us, the individual. We're going to go counterclockwise around our diagram. Okay, we as individuals, we make what up a factor of production, right? We're the laborers. We go to work, we make money, we spend money. So we're the individuals are important here, right? So we go to the store, which is a product market. Remember, he said a product market is where things are bought and sold. Okay, so whether it's an online store, you go to the grocery store, Walmart, Target, it doesn't matter. Any store, any place where things can be sold is a product market. Okay, so we as individuals, we spend our money in the product market. That money goes to businesses as income. That business is going to then turn around and they are going to pay for the things that are made in the factor market. Remember, our factors are land, labor, capital, and entrepreneur. So they're buying these factors of production, the goods made in the factor market, and that becomes income for us, the laborers who are actually making the product. We spend money, becomes income for the business. They turn around to pay for the things that they are putting in their store, and that becomes income for our household. Okay, that's the flow of money. But let's look at individuals in our blue flow. This is the flow of goods and services. All right, so we as the laborer in our 4 factors of production here, which an easy way to remember it, guys, is sell. C-E-L-L. Capital, entrepreneur, land, and labor. Sell. Okay, so we as labor in this factors of production go to our job and we make a product. It's going to go to the businesses are going to buy it. They're then going to turn around and put that in their store, and the stores are, then provide the goods or service to us, the individuals. Okay, you are going to use this knowledge of the circular flow model to complete a infographic as one of your daily assignments. The infographic was set out by the Federal Bureau of Atlanta, the Federal Reserve of Atlanta, and you're looking at the circular flow model and where specific instances fall in the circular flow model. If you need a further explanation of the circular flow model, always go back to this video. You can rewatch the description that he put out. Next class, we're going to look at how we go about making these decisions. Okay, he said that everything had a trade-off. Okay, because everything has a cost, we're gonna have to give up things in order to make specific things. And that's what we'll look at on our next class period.